What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical, average American here today to react and learn about why Europe is insanely well designed. Now, today, I really want to take a look at this video by OBF about how Europe's infrastructure compares to America. And I think what we're really talking about here is public transportation and how you get around Europe. And I want to see what it's like traveling around Europe and maybe how America can learn from this. So let's take a look.
This is a map of Europe's mass transit railway system across 33 countries. The yellow lines indicate the presence of a train line, and as you can see, it's very dense. There are hardly any spaces where there isn't any coverage for railways.
What the heck? What? This is the rail system in Europe. I've never seen this before, actually. It's so everywhere. It's so useful. It's so obvious, honestly, when you think about it. And the reason I'm getting a little bit almost annoyed here is like, we don't have anything like this here in the United States that allows us to travel around our country. We have a pretty big country, it's almost like a bunch of little countries put together at times. All the states, they can be pretty different, pretty big, pretty far apart. We can spend our entire lives here in America trying to explore all the states. But you can't, because it's tough to do. You got to get in a car, because we don't have infrastructure, and I don't know why, honestly. So when I see that Europe obviously has a huge, just a rail, like train infrastructure. It goes everywhere. Like you can get all the way to northern Sweden, all the way down to the south of Spain, if you wanted to, just by riding this rail. And that's incredible. And it shouldn't be incredible to us Americans, I think. It should be normal, but I don't know what we're doing.
Now, if we compare this to a map of railroad tracks in the US, it's a different story. While parts of the US have some good mass transit, there are large areas of the country which isn't covered by Amtrak, the nation's largest passenger railroad service. But
Yeah, exactly. There's these here. I mean, to be honest, I'm actually kind of surprised we have this much. When you think of railway and trains in the United States, anytime I see that stuff, it's transporting cargo, like goods and products and stuff like that. Never people. It's so rare to see that. And there's huge parts of the United States, like you can kind of see on this map, where there's just nothing available.
let me show you another map, this time of high-speed rail in Europe. Now obviously, high-speed railways aren't going to be as common as regular speed railways as they require excellent design, strict planning, and massive investment.
Wow.
And yet, as we can see, high-speed rail is present in Europe, which is a stark contrast to the US, as you can see from this map. While the US does have some higher speed rail, like the Aquila line in the Northeastern Corridor, it's hardly an effective map of transport solutions.
Yeah. Let me look at this map again. This is the high-speed rail. Again, it's so sparse. I know it looks like it goes across the United States, and it does. But trust me, like with the 50 states, like if you're looking at this in the top left, that's like, I don't know, 10 or so states that basically have nothing going on in the case of high-speed rail. No way to access the other country. So yeah, I'm I'm almost a little impressed there's this much, to be completely honest, because you never hear about this, but it surely and certainly doesn't compare very well to Europe, how Europe has designed it.
corridor, it's hardly an effective map of transport solutions. And the Aquila line isn't really that fast either. It can reach about 150 miles per hour, but averages less than 70. This is not the case for Europe's insanely well-designed railroad system. And you have to remember that Europe's system accomplishes this while spanning 33 different nations in a very diverse continent.
33 nations. And lots of high-speed transit. It's just like Europe is living in the future, or something, basically. And with all the tax money we collect here in the United States, I think a lot of Americans are just frustrated when we see stuff like this. It just makes me wonder what we're doing. We certainly could have done something like this by now, right? Right?
And I know what you're probably thinking. This is just because Europe is smaller than the United States, which simply isn't true. While the European Union is smaller than the US, continental Europe has an area that is about 1.04 times as much as the US. So we can dismiss this argument that the United States can't be that well designed because it's too big.
I didn't know that.
Europe simply is better designed. But if you're American, you might not understand why railroad tracks or public transport as a whole is so important. I mean, driving a car works fine, right? Well, no. And Europe showcases why a primary focus on private transportation is so detrimental to a well-functioning transit system.
Yeah, just looking at some of this stuff, like this picture, like these rail car things, these, what do you call these? I don't know, street cars or something. You don't see these maybe in like the biggest major cities in the United States, like New York. But also, so it's kind of interesting to see that, and also all the people walking, people actually walking out there in Europe. Again, not very common here. And yes, we are a country built for cars and driving. That is just what everyone does and what we're used to.
Focus on private transportation is so detrimental to a well-functioning transit system. Look at these maps. They show the US road network versus the EU's. And as you can see, the EU's road network is not nearly as impressive as the US's. And
this is so cool. I've never seen like a lot of these maps before. And that's the road network in Europe? There's like not that many roads or highways or whatever you want to call them. And in the United States, that map just looks normal to me. It's like, yeah, like there's a lot of major highways and roads. I don't know how zoomed out we are because there's many, many, many more smaller roads than that on that map. But I didn't know Europe, like, is using cars that discouraged or that uncommon, that you only need this many roads. That would never work in the United States. It'd be traffic forever, I think. It'd be way too congested.
And yet, when you look at some of the most congested cities in the world, European countries don't feature particularly prominently in the global rankings. This is pretty shocking information because you'd assume that the country with a more expansive road network has a lot less congestion, especially considering the United States has devoted lots of time and money to their highways.
Yeah.
So, how come Europe is less congested when they have fewer roads?
Yeah.
Well, it all comes down to disincentivizing the use of cars and, most importantly, making an attractive alternative. Europe does this by having both private and public transportation infrastructure, which technically the US has as well, it's just a lot worse. But on top of this,
I don't even know about most of the US private public transit infrastructure because it doesn't touch a lot of the United States. I guess it exists. I'm being told it exists. But as someone who lives in the United States, it's not well known. It's not very accessible. You drive your car. In Europe, you're actually disincentivized to drive it so that you use more public transportation. I like that. I like that a lot. It's good for a lot of reasons, just like for the environment, for like reducing road traffic, like, I don't know, all sorts of stuff.
Europe makes it pretty expensive to buy, own, and use a car. This is achieved by having high taxes on vehicles and gasoline. In fact, here's a map of worldwide gasoline prices. As you can see, European nations are in the top rankings, while the US lies at the bottom, charging very little. But let me be very clear, it's only a good idea to make it expensive to drive a car if you have an attractive alternative, which America doesn't, but Europe does.
I mean,
obviously this wouldn't work in the US with its current transportation infrastructure, but in Europe, this is a great strategy because you make the roads less congested for those who actually need them and give everyone else an affordable and efficient alternative, being Europe's amazing public transport like the trains on the railways.
This is so cool. Like, so interesting too. Europe is a lot more different in this respect than I ever thought about or imagined. You're actually taxed more to own a car. Like, they don't want you to own a car unless you really have to. You're really encouraged to use public transportation. That's just a whole different way of living your life, really. In the United States, I mean, I don't think this would work in the United States for a lot of reasons. First and foremost, we do not have the alternative, the public transportation that would accommodate people not driving, for one thing. And the next, I just think Americans are used to this, that we're used to having that autonomy. Like, I would feel naked without a car. Is that strange? Like, I would feel stuck. Like, oh, I gotta go to the bus or to the train to get where I need to go. I gotta walk. Like, I'd feel kind of like claustrophobic in a weird way, like taking the car away. Maybe that's a very American mindset I never really realized we have.
This is arguably the better strategy because even though the vast majority of Americans have access to vehicles at around 91% and gas is comparatively cheap, it still leaves 9% who don't have access to vehicles.
Right.
What are these people who can't afford a car supposed to do? I mean, sometimes public transport isn't even an option or is simply too expensive for many. So you've now actively excluded those who aren't exactly the most well off from society.
True.
To make matters worse, some US cities actually got rid of their public transport to make room for more cars. I'm not joking. American streetcars like trams were actually removed to make way for bigger roads.
I believe it. We are like, because I don't see trams and streetcars and not that many buses. And they certainly don't go everywhere. So I totally believe this. At one point, maybe we had the infrastructure a little more, and then we just totally committed to the car thing. I didn't even know that part of our history.
Absolutely insane. Compare that to Oslo, Berlin, and Madrid, where discussions are underway to restrict or even exclude most cars from the city center. And let's not forget that when you have cars, you also need somewhere to park them. And this is where things start to become rather ridiculous.
Yeah.
You see, the United States has 2 billion parking spaces for 250 million cars. That's 8 parking spaces per vehicle.
Really?
In Europe, it's pretty much a 1-to-1 with around 250 million public parking spaces for 300 million cars.
How do Europeans do it? Like, are you just more organized than us? Like, you just get it? In the United States, we need 8 parking spots for every person. I don't know. Our parking lots are everywhere and huge, and we'll still complain about not getting a spot close enough to the front of the grocery store when it's not there. So I believe this.
But to emphasize the ridiculousness of this even further, the area that the US dedicates for car parking is actually larger than the area dedicated for housing people. It's honestly unbelievable that people are being squeezed out of American cities due to regulators wanting to make more room for parking spaces. This simply wouldn't fly in the EU, as it has a whole policy dedicated to improving urban planning. See,
we have more parking space than living space. I did not know that. That made me have a different. I was so shocked there. That made me have a different accent. I didn't know. I didn't know that. I don't know. I don't know what happened to me there.
The EU spent 115 billion euros between 2014 and 2020 to improve city design by making it smarter, greener, and more connected. Simply meaning they allocated funds to make their cities more efficient, more connected, and better for the environment.
Yeah.
And better for the environment they really are.
Yeah.
As the average resident in a typical Western US city, such as Los Angeles or Phoenix, contributes approximately 6 times more carbon to the atmosphere per capita than an average European city resident. This is purely the result of not having effective transport solutions, which saves resources and allows people to move about efficiently.
I guess this is another elephant in the room that we have to acknowledge. Like in America, we are burning gas like none other. We have cars like none other. Bad for the environment, pollution, wasting resources, all because we are just not willing to change our ways. And I do stand by that. I don't see this really changing. Even seeing this video with all this proof and explanation of how Europe is so much better designed, with less cars, more infrastructure, more public transportation, and how better off things are. I still don't think that's enough to, like, even if all Americans had to watch this, I don't think it would happen. It's just ingrained in us, sadly.
And exactly that, moving about efficiently is something most of Europe's citizens are able to do as a result of the European Union.
There's people on bikes. There's people on bikes. What's the last time I saw someone on a bike? So that guy's got a scooter. If this were America, this street would be packed with cars. You got people walking.
See, most of Europe's nations are in the European Union, which gives the EU citizens a number of perks, which includes a free travel area. This has been one of the most important achievements of the EU, as it makes it possible for an EU citizen to travel freely to other EU member states and stay for up to 3 months. All they need is a passport or even just an ID card. No visas, no trips to embassies, no form filing, just head straight over. This
is a good point and something I never have thought about either. In Europe, you must feel so connected, and that's awesome. Like you are connected by this big transport infrastructure that lets you travel between all the European countries and explore and vacation, and that's really cool. Like that's a whole thing I can't really relate to, honestly. That feeling of like feeling really connected.
Makes it incredibly easy to travel, study, and work in other countries and communities, and having this level of centralization is very important to good design, as it gives the smartest people the opportunity to work where they are most useful. And since good design obviously requires a lot of complicated problem solving and planning, this is very smart. Another smart thing is the incredible biking infrastructure we see in Europe, perfectly illustrated by this map of bike path density in Europe. All the purple lines are bike paths, and there's clearly a lot of them, especially towards the left side of the map, but that's just because this is the home of the Dutch, the Netherlands. Now, the funny thing...
Biking. If you see someone biking, like in some places in the United States, it's like endless cars, and then you see someone biking... I'm not kidding. Sometimes you're like, how strange. What a weird guy. He's on his bike. He's walking. How strange. I'm not even kidding.
Thing is, I won't be able to compare this to a map of bike path density in the United States because such a map hasn't been made. At least I wasn't able to find any, and I can only wonder why. But anyway, what Europe and also the European Union has achieved is pretty remarkable, as it's hard to think of another set of such diverse countries where you would be able to travel so freely, in an efficient and inexpensive manner. I mean, you can literally get from Paris to Amsterdam, for example, in just 3 hours for around $30. Imagine being able to travel all over Asia without any border crossings, checks, or visas, and being able to stay...
Oh, that's another part they're talking about. You can travel all over Europe. If you're part of the European Union, you don't have to keep getting out your passport and going through checks and customs, and if you're part of this partnership. That's really awesome. It's one of the biggest reasons Americans aren't exposed to a lot of other cultures. We're kind of in our American bubble, and we don't really understand the rest of the world very well. We don't have this opportunity to just travel to another country, another language, another culture, with different ideas and ways of doing things. We don't just have access to that on hopping on the train going 3 hours. That's really special to me, and I hope not something Europeans take for granted, because that sounds like a superpower, honestly.
For months at a time. That would be truly amazing. And let's not forget that European design has always been distinctive and very successful. In fact, the continent's history of design and interconnectedness serves as a model for the rest of the world.
Wow.
But even though Europe and the EU are pretty great and have amazing infrastructure, they obviously aren't perfect. And I'd love to hear some of the reasons it might not be, so leave a comment down below if you have some thoughts on this. But that's it for this video.
Okay, there we have it. That was so interesting. That was a great video. That was great. Again, that was by OBF. Great video. I never knew this about Europe. How well connected it is. Well designed. And how you can travel between all the countries with very low friction. Like, not much barrier to entry. And it's not that expensive. And you'd think, we're just one country out here in the United States. You'd think we could accomplish half of this. Not really. We're just a nation of cars, but this definitely opened my eyes. I don't think this is going to happen here, but I'm now jealous. And this is really cool to know this exists, this way of doing things. I really enjoyed this. Anyway, if you enjoyed this as well, feel free to give this video a like or leave a comment. If you're European, if you've experienced any of this infrastructure and traveling, and feel free to leave a comment with your experiences about this. That'd be awesome to hear about. And if you're interested in more videos like this, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching, and see you next time.